The day Max looked at me with those cold, accusatory eyes, I felt like the ground had just crumbled beneath my feet. "You're the reason we can't have a family, Emma," he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence of our home like a blade. "I've tried everything. I've been patient, I've been kind, but you—" He paused, the words seemingly stuck in his throat, but it was too late. I already knew where this was heading. He was blaming me, placing the entire weight of our broken dreams on my shoulders. I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I fought them back. I needed to keep it together, or so I thought. My world had just been turned upside down, and all I could think of was how this accusation, was somehow my fault. He couldn't have been serious, could he? Max, the man I'd loved for so long, the man I thought I would grow old with, was leaving me. But it wasn't just that. He had found someone else, someone who could give him the family he wanted. Someone who wasn't broken like I was. How could this have happened? How had things gone so wrong so quickly? We'd been trying for a baby for so long. And while I thought we were in this together, Max seemed to think that I was the one holding us back. It wasn't just his words that hurt. It was the look in his eyes. He didn't even seem to care that he was tearing me apart, that he was accusing me of something so painful, so personal. And the worst part, I believed him. For days, I replayed every moment, every argument, every moment of doubt in our marriage. I wondered if there was something I had missed. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe my body had betrayed me. And that's why we couldn't have children. I couldn't stop myself from thinking these things, even though I knew deep down that it wasn't fair. He had to be wrong. But still the doubt lingered, gnawing at me, breaking me down piece by piece. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Max had already been unfaithful to me long before the infertility conversation ever took place. His betrayal had started well before he ever laid the blame on me. But I was too blind to see it. I was too wrapped up in the whirlwind of trying to get pregnant, too focused on saving my marriage, to notice the signs. The late nights, the strange excuses, the moments when he wasn't himself. It had all been happening behind my back, but I never suspected it. He was my husband, my rock. Or so I thought. When he left, it felt like my entire world had shattered. The betrayal, the lies, the complete disregard for everything we had built together. It was too much to process. I couldn't even bring myself to hate him. All I could feel was guilt. It was as if his words had taken root deep inside of me. And I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, some way, it was all my fault. If only I had been able to give him what he wanted. If only I had been able to bear him children, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe he wouldn't have left me for someone else. I spent days crying, wondering if I could have done more, if I could have tried harder, been better. I told myself that I was the reason this had all fallen apart. Max had given me no choice but to believe it. After all, he had been so sure, so certain that it was my fault. I could almost feel his words echoing in my mind, each one a sharp reminder of what I couldn't give him. I felt small. I felt invisible. And worst of all, I felt like I had failed him. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to pull myself together. I couldn't let this define me, I told myself. I had to get out of this dark hole I had dug for myself. I began to realize that maybe I needed to understand more about what was happening to me. Maybe I wasn't the problem after all. But how could I be sure? Was there a way to prove that I wasn't the one at fault? I remember the day I made the decision, though I didn't fully understand why I felt the need to go through with it at the time. I had just left Max, devastated and unsure of where my life was headed. His words still echoed in my mind, twisting and turning in my thoughts like a never-ending loop. "You're the reason we can't have a family." Those words stung deeper than anything I'd ever felt. And though I knew deep down that they weren't true, they still had the power to make me doubt myself. So I made the choice. I would go to the clinic quietly, without anyone knowing. I needed to be sure. Not just for me, but for my peace of mind. I needed to understand whether Max had been right all along. The thought of going to the doctor alone made me feel so small. But I couldn't talk to anyone about this. Not yet. Not when I was still unsure of myself. And certainly not when the pain of what Max had done was still so fresh. I told myself it was just a routine checkup. But the reality was I was terrified. Terrified that the results would show what Max had claimed. Something was wrong with me. That maybe I wasn't fit to be a mother, that I wasn't capable of giving him the life we had dreamed of. My heart raced as I waited in the sterile room, the cold walls almost suffocating me. It wasn't just the test itself. It was the weight of everything that had led me here. The overwhelming burden of being the one blamed, the one discarded. The nurse was kind, her smile warm and reassuring. She didn't know what I was going through, but I appreciated her calm demeanor. "Everything's going to be fine," she said, though it felt like a lie. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the doubt was there, lurking in the back of my mind, holding me hostage. What if the tests came back, and I was the one to blame? What would I do then? I had no answers, only questions, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. When I finally left the clinic, the weight of my emotions hadn't lifted. I still didn't know what the results would be, but I knew that if I was wrong, if I had been falsely accused, then the truth would have to come out eventually. I could only hope that the truth would set me free, that it would give me the closure I needed. But what if it didn't? What if the truth was something I wasn't ready to hear? The days that followed felt like a blur. I kept checking my phone, waiting for the call, for the moment when the doctor would tell me the truth. Each day dragged on, and yet the call never came. I was on edge, each passing hour filled with more anticipation. I couldn't rest, couldn't focus. I needed answers, but I was scared. What if the results were worse than I feared? What if I was the one who couldn't give him what he wanted after all? Then one afternoon my phone rang. It was the clinic. I picked up, my hands shaking. "Hello, Emma," the voice on the other end said, calm but firm. "We have your results, and we need you to come in for a follow-up appointment." My heart sank. Was this it? Was this the moment that would either make or break me? I asked if I could just get the results over the phone, but the nurse explained that it was more complicated than just reading off a sheet. "It's better to discuss it in person," she said. The dread settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake off. It had to be bad news. There was no other reason for them to ask me to come in, right? The drive to the clinic felt like the longest journey of my life. Each turn, each stoplight, felt like it stretched on forever. I kept telling myself it wasn't the end, that it couldn't be. But deep down, I feared it was. When I arrived at the clinic, the nurse greeted me kindly and led me into a small room where the doctor was waiting. "Emma," the doctor said, offering me a warm but concerned smile. "We've gone over your results carefully, and I'm happy to report that you're completely healthy. Your fertility is normal. There's nothing wrong with you." I sat there stunned. For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. All the guilt, all the pain, all the doubts I had been carrying with me suddenly felt like they were lifted from my shoulders. Max had been wrong. I wasn't the problem. But the relief was bittersweet. I couldn't celebrate the news, not yet. I was still grappling with the fact that Max had made me believe I was the one who had failed us. I didn't know how to feel. The doctor continued talking, but I couldn't really hear him. My mind was racing, the pieces of the puzzle slowly starting to fall into place. If I wasn't the problem, then who was? Max had been so sure, so confident that it was my fault. But now, I had proof that I wasn't the one who needed fixing. I wasn't the one who had broken our dreams. I left the clinic that day, my mind swirling with a mix of emotions. There was relief, yes, but there was also anger. Anger at Max for putting me through this. Anger at myself for believing him for so long. I couldn't wait to confront him, to tell him the truth. But I knew that, for now, I had to keep quiet. I had to let him dig his own hole a little deeper before I revealed the truth. The moment I learned the truth, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath me once again. But this time, it wasn't because of Max's accusations or my own doubts. No, this time, it was because I had discovered something so unexpected, so unbelievable, that it completely shattered everything I had thought I knew about our failed marriage. Max wasn't the victim he had made himself out to be. In fact, he wasn't the one who had been wronged. He wasn't even the one who had been honest. I hadn't been prepared for this truth, not in the slightest. After the relief of my medical results, I thought things would start to make sense. I thought I could finally move on and confront Max with the proof I had that I wasn't the issue. But what I didn't expect was to find out that the real issue lay squarely with him. It all started when I received a message from a close friend of mine. someone who had been watching Max from afar. It wasn't unusual for my friends to check in on me, but this time, the tone of the message was different. It was almost as if she knew something I didn't. She mentioned that Max had been to see a specialist about his health issues. The message left me stunned. What health issues? What was she talking about? Was he sick? And why had he never mentioned it to me? I didn't know what to make of it. I couldn't believe he would hide something so serious from me, especially after everything we had been through. But of course my curiosity got the best of me. I had to find out more. I called my friend immediately, needing to know everything she knew. Her response made my stomach drop. You didn't know? Max has been dealing with his own fertility issues for months. The doctor told him he has low sperm count, and he's been trying to manage it in secret. He's been too proud to admit it though. He's been too afraid to face it. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Max had fertility problems too? He had been hiding it from me all along. The truth was right there, in front of me, yet I had never seen it. He had blamed me for our inability to have children when all along, it was his own body that couldn't provide. His pride, his refusal to face the truth, had made him push me aside and destroy everything we had built. I couldn't even begin to understand why he hadn't told me the truth from the start. It wasn't just the fact that he had fertility issues. It was the way he had manipulated me, the way he had twisted my feelings, and made me believe I was the one at fault. He had known all along that he couldn't have children, and yet he still turned to another woman, blaming me for everything. My mind raced with anger and disbelief. He had humiliated me, made me feel like I was worthless, and for what? Because he couldn't own up to his own struggles? I wanted to confront him. I wanted to yell, to scream, to throw all of it in his face, and watch him squirm in the realization of his own cowardice. But as I stood there, digesting the truth, something inside me told me to hold back. It wasn't time yet. Max needed to keep living in his lie for just a little longer. I would let him think he had gotten away with it. I would let him dig himself deeper into his own web of deceit. This truth, it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Max's inability to face himself. It was about his pride and his refusal to acknowledge his own flaws. It was about his ego and how it had ruined everything. But I didn't need to rush into confrontation. I would wait for the perfect moment. And when it came, it would be the most humiliating moment of his life. As much as it hurt, I knew that this was the moment I had been waiting for. It wasn't just the truth I was after anymore, it was justice. Max had robbed me of my dignity, my trust, and my happiness. And now, I would make him face the consequences of his actions. I had learned the truth. I had all the pieces in my hands. But instead of rushing into the confrontation, instead of letting the anger take control, I decided to hold back. I had to be smarter than that. Max had already ruined so much for me, but now I had something he didn't expect, a secret weapon. And I was going to use it, not with immediate rage, but with calculated patience. There was a strange kind of power in silence. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It wasn't about getting even or making him suffer. It was about showing him how small his lies had made him, how he had reduced everything we had built together into a series of empty accusations and unfounded beliefs. And instead of confronting him right away, I realized that letting him stew in his own guilt, letting him carry on thinking I didn't know, would hurt him far more than any words I could throw at him. So I stayed quiet. I listened to him talk about his new life, his new woman, as if nothing had happened. He was living in his little bubble, unaware that I knew everything. Every moment he spent with her, every word he whispered to her. I imagined how deeply he was sinking into his own lies. It was almost too easy, watching him stumble through the days, still wrapped up in his delusion. But it wasn't just about him. It was about me too. I had to move on from the hurt, from the pain he had caused. I had to focus on myself now, on what I wanted for my life. I refused to let him define me, so I started living for me. I spent more time with friends, I focused on my career, and I worked on finding happiness in the little things. And the more I built my life without him, the more I realized how much stronger I had become. It wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about proving it to myself, that I could stand on my own, and that I could be better than all of this. Every time I saw him, I couldn't help but notice how different he seemed. There was something about the way he carried himself, like he was still trying to convince the world that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew the truth was eating away at him. How could it not? He had to live with the knowledge that he had destroyed something good, that he had thrown it all away over his own insecurities, his own fears. And yet, here I was stronger than ever, moving forward with my life, while he remained stuck in the mess he had created. It was a quiet kind of revenge, but it was the sweetest kind. I didn't need to confront him. I didn't need to make a scene. No, my revenge was in living my life the way I always should have. I knew the truth, and I was content in that. I wasn't bitter anymore. But Max, well, he had to live with his own lies. And that was punishment enough. As I stood there, watching him from afar, I realized that he had already been punished. He just didn't know it yet. His life, now filled with regret, was all the consequence he would ever face. And that in itself was the sweetest form of revenge. The moment had come, and I could feel it in my bones. I had waited for this, watched him dig himself deeper into a hole, and now, it was time to expose him. Max had made the ultimate mistake. He thought he could just move on, without consequences, without acknowledging the pain he had caused. But life doesn't work like that, does it? You can't just destroy someone's world and expect to walk away untouched. And now, here I was standing at the crossroads of my own redemption. It all started when Max made the announcement. He was getting engaged to her, the woman he had left me for, the woman who, apparently, had been everything I wasn't. He paraded it around like it was some kind of victory, as if he had finally won the prize he'd been looking for all along. The social media posts were full of their smiles, their promises of a perfect future. But behind all that, I could feel the weight of the situation. He thought he had escaped his past, but I knew better. I wasn't just going to let him pretend everything was fine. I waited for the perfect moment. It wasn't enough for me to simply know the truth anymore. It wasn't enough to just have the satisfaction of knowing he was wrong. I wanted the world to see him for who he truly was. The man who had torn my life apart, who had falsely accused me and blamed me for everything that went wrong in our marriage. It was time for everyone to see the truth, and it had to be on my terms. At the moment when Max felt he was on top of the world. The announcement was public, his engagement to her, the love of his life, the future he had chosen. It was everywhere. On Facebook, Instagram, in the newspapers, all over the internet. He wanted the world to know how happy he was, how he had moved on, and found happiness with someone else. The audacity of it all. But what he didn't expect was for me to stand up and tell the world the real story. It wasn't going to be a simple post. No, I was going to do this the right way. I was going to expose him in front of everyone who had ever known us, everyone who had watched our marriage fall apart. And I wasn't going to hold back. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing the world the true face of the man they thought they knew. I waited until the engagement photos had flooded social media, until Max thought he was untouchable. And then I posted. It wasn't a long message, but it was powerful, and it was direct. I shared everything. The truth about his infertility, the lies he had told, the way he had blamed me for everything that had gone wrong. And I made sure to remind everyone of the person he had been. The man who had walked away from his wife, who had made her believe she was the problem, when the truth was that he had been the one who couldn't face reality. The reactions came flooding in. People who had once been his supporters started questioning him. Friends who had been silent during our marriage started reaching out to me, apologizing for not seeing the truth sooner. And Max, well, he wasn't as confident as he had been. His fiancée was suddenly distant, her smile fading. I could feel the shift in the air, the moment when everything changed for him. It wasn't just the truth I had revealed. It was the timing, the way I had taken control of my own story. Max's pride, his desperate attempt to move on, had led him to forget one thing. You can't run from your past. You can't erase the damage you've done, no matter how hard you try. And now everyone knew. Everyone could see the truth. I wasn't the one at fault. I wasn't the one who had broken our marriage. He had to live with the knowledge that the lies he had built up for so long were now exposed for everyone to see. It was one of the most liberating moments of my life. I had finally taken back my power, my voice. I wasn't just some woman who had been discarded. I was someone who had fought for the truth, for my dignity, and for my happiness. And Max, he had just learned that betrayal always catches up to you, no matter how far you run. I could almost feel the shift in the air after I exposed Max for who he truly was. The days that followed were a whirlwind, and it was clear to anyone who was watching that Max's carefully constructed life was starting to crumble. He had been so sure of himself, so confident that he could just leave me behind, marry another woman, and somehow erase everything that came before. But the truth had a funny way of sneaking up on you, didn't it? It had a way of showing its face when you least expected it. And now Max was starting to face the consequences of his arrogance. At first, I watched from a distance, not wanting to get involved any further. I had already done what I needed to do. Max had been exposed. He couldn't hide behind his lies anymore, couldn't pretend like he was the victim. But then the messages started pouring in. People from our past, mutual friends, acquaintances, even strangers who had followed the story, all asking me how I felt about what had happened. Max had become a spectacle, the man who had destroyed his own life by trying to destroy someone else's. And it was only a matter of time before he realized it. I didn't have to look far to see the impact of my actions. Max's fiancée, the woman he had left me for, began pulling away from him. I don't know what she saw in him in the first place, but the way she looked at him after the truth came out was enough to make anyone feel uncomfortable. She stopped posting pictures with him on social media, stopped sharing their love story with the world. The once perfect couple had begun to crack at the seams. And then, not long after, the engagement was called off. Max didn't see it coming. His pride and arrogance had blinded him to the fact that he had destroyed everything, including the very thing he had fought so hard to protect, his reputation. He had been so sure that he could move on, that he could leave me behind and never look back. But the world doesn't forget so easily. The lies had caught up with him, and now, his fiancée was gone. The woman he had replaced me with no longer wanting anything to do with him. And the fall didn't stop there. His friends began to distance themselves. The ones who had once praised him, who had once stood by his side, all started questioning his character. People didn't want to associate with someone who had publicly humiliated his wife and blamed her for everything when the fault was his own. It wasn't just the relationship that had fallen apart. It was his entire support system. He was left alone, with nothing but the wreckage of his own decisions. But the worst blow came when his mother, the woman who had always been there for him, the one person who seemed to see him as perfect, took a step back. I heard about it from a friend who had seen her at a family gathering. Apparently, she couldn't look at him the same way anymore. She couldn't support someone who had so easily discarded a woman who had loved him unconditionally, who had stood by him through everything. His mother was disappointed, and that hurt him more than anything else. A mother's love is unconditional, but even that had its limits. Max had spent so long living in his own bubble, convinced that he could control everything around him, that he could manipulate people into believing his version of events. But now he was left with nothing. No woman by his side, no friends to lean on, no family support. His reputation had been shattered, and there he was, sitting in the ruins of the life he had chosen for himself. He had built this world around his lies, around his pride, and now it was all coming apart at the seams. As I watched it all unfold, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Max had thought he could walk away from everything without any consequences. But life had a way of catching up with him. And I had been the one to make sure that the truth would be heard. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about showing him that no one can escape the consequences of their actions, no matter how hard they try. But even though I felt a certain peace in knowing that he was paying for his mistakes, I didn't feel the need to celebrate. I had moved on. I had already found my peace, my healing, in ways that Max could never understand. The satisfaction didn't come from seeing him suffer. It came from knowing that I was no longer the one left in the ruins of our past. It's strange, isn't it? How life works in such unexpected ways. I had once believed that the greatest victory would be in seeing Max suffer for what he had done to me, in watching him fall apart as I had. But as time passed, I realized that the real victory wasn't about his downfall. It was about me. About the woman I was becoming. The woman I had forgotten I was. The woman I had been before Max's betrayal, before his lies, and before the pain he had caused me. I had spent so much time focusing on what I had lost, on the years I had given to him, on the life we had built, and then torn apart. But eventually something shifted in me. I started to realize that the only person who could rebuild my life was me. I wasn't going to wait for him to regret his actions. I wasn't going to wait for some grand apology. I was going to take control, and I was going to move forward without him. And so I did. Slowly at first, but then with more confidence. I focused on my own happiness, on what made me feel alive again. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I had lost touch with while I was busy trying to save my marriage. I started doing the things I loved, things that Max had never cared about, things that reminded me of who I was before I had become consumed by someone else's needs and desires. I started seeing life as something I could shape on my own terms, not something that was determined by the whims of someone who couldn't even see me for who I truly was. And with that realization came the most beautiful transformation. I was healing, I was growing, and I was becoming the person I had always been underneath the pain. I was stronger, more confident, and more aware of my own worth than I had ever been before. And then one day I met Johan. I wasn't looking for love, not at first. I had spent so much of my energy on surviving, on figuring out who I was again, that I hadn't considered that someone could actually be there for me in the way that I needed. But Johan was different. He didn't need me to be anyone else. He didn't want me to be a perfect partner, or fit some ideal version of what a woman should be. He loved me for who I was: broken, healed, strong, vulnerable, and everything in between. With him, I found peace. I found a love that was pure, that didn't come with conditions, that didn't come with blame or accusations. It was the kind of love that I had always deserved, the kind that Max had never been able to offer. It was in Johan's arms that I learned what real partnership felt like. And for the first time in a long time, I truly felt whole. And while life with Johan wasn't perfect, no love is. It was everything I had been searching for. We built a life together, a family of our own. We embraced each other's flaws, our pasts, and created something that was ours. Something beautiful and real. There was no room for the bitterness I had once carried. No room for the regrets that had weighed me down for so long. It was just us moving forward, building a future that was brighter than anything I had imagined. Max, meanwhile, was left to live with his own choices. The man who had once thought he could have it all was now alone. He had chosen his ego, his pride, over everything that truly mattered. And the saddest part? He would never know the kind of love I had found with Johan. He would never experience the peace I had now. And though I had no desire to watch him suffer, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. I had moved on. I had found happiness. And I had done it all on my own terms. As for Max, he would always be haunted by the choices he had made. And while I had no interest in revisiting the past or making him see the error of his ways, there was one thing I knew for sure. The best revenge was living a fulfilled life. And I had done just that. I had found peace. I had found love. And most importantly, I had found myself again. Years passed since everything had fallen apart, and life, as it tends to do, moved on. I had long since put the pieces of my life back together. The pain Max had caused, the betrayal, the lies, those things were no longer part of my daily thoughts. I had my new life with Johan, a family that was mine, built from trust and mutual respect. I had healed in ways I didn't even know were possible. And the woman I was now was someone far stronger and more at peace than the woman I had been when Max left me. But Max, he was still out there. I didn't think about him much anymore. The world had forgotten about his lies, moved on to new scandals, new stories. He had faded into the background, just another man who had made a mistake and tried to rebuild his life. But not without consequences. It was in the quiet moments, those rare instances when I remembered the past, that I would wonder how he was doing. Was he still alone? Did he ever regret the choices he had made? Did he ever look back and realize that the greatest mistake of his life wasn't the end of our marriage? It was the way he had treated me, the way he had pushed me aside for someone else? Then, one afternoon, as I was sitting with Johan, enjoying the peaceful routine of our life, I got an email. At first, I didn't recognize the name that appeared in my inbox. Max's name wasn't one I thought of often anymore. And seeing it there was a shock. I almost didn't open it. I didn't need to hear from him. I didn't need any more apologies. But curiosity got the best of me, and I clicked. The email was brief. He apologized for everything. The betrayal, the accusations, the way he had destroyed our life together. He admitted his mistakes, said he regretted everything, and wished that things could have been different. He said he had finally come to terms with the fact that it wasn't me who was the problem. It was him. He had been too proud, too afraid to admit the truth, and in doing so, he had lost everything that mattered. His words, though sincere, felt hollow. They felt too little too late. As I sat there reading his words, something inside of me shifted. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He had spent all this time living with the regret of what he had done, and now, when it was far too late for anything to be changed, he was reaching out to me, looking for forgiveness that I could never give him. But that wasn't what really mattered to me anymore. I had forgiven myself. I had moved on from the past, from the pain he had caused, and I had built a life that was full of love and happiness. The life he had taken for granted was now mine. And no apology, no regret could change that. I thought about responding. I thought about telling him that his apology, though appreciated, didn't change anything. But I didn't. Because the truth was I didn't need to. He had already gotten what he deserved. His own loneliness, his own regret, his own realization that the life he had once had was the life he would never get back. Instead, I deleted the email. I didn't need to carry it with me. Just like I didn't need to carry the past anymore. The greatest victory wasn't in the fact that Max had finally realized his mistakes. It was in the fact that I had already moved on, had already created something far more beautiful than the life I had with him. I had found happiness without him, and that I realized was the sweetest form of closure. Max had sent his apology, but it wasn't for me to accept. It was for him to find peace with his own actions. I had long since found my peace, and the last thing I needed was his regret to haunt me. His apology wasn't a doorway back to him. It was simply a reminder that the best revenge, the truest form of justice, was living a fulfilled life.